Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Internal Audit Committee. It is Tuesday, May 22nd. Approval of agenda. Any added changes, deletions to the approval of agenda? Seeing none, Councilor Medeiros, you move approval of agenda. All in favor? That carries. There's no declarations of, or is there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, no consent. Our first item is a report from, or a delegation from Mr. Kevin Travers, partner KPMG, Chartered Accountants, regarding KPMG audit findings report, year ended December 31st, 2017. It relates to item 6.1. I'll bring that forward at this time as well. Kevin, nice to see you.
Yes, you too. Good morning. Hope everyone is well today. I'm going to speak briefly to the audit findings report that relates to the financial statements for the City of Brampton for the year ended December 31st, 2017. So this is in the agenda package at 6.135 and onward. And as I said, it refers to the financial statements which precede that within the agenda package. I'll speak to the highlights of the report. I don't intend to do a page by page at all. Certainly, I'm comfortable responding to questions as I'm proceeding or at the conclusion of the presentation itself. From an overall summary standpoint, I just would point out that the audit has been completed. You'll see within the financial statements that we've provided an unqualified or clean audit opinion. There are, from the overall summary standpoint at this point, I can report that there were no control deficiencies that were noted during the course of the audit. There were no performance improvement observations that were noted. That's good news, of course. I also point out when I make that commentary that our objective is to provide an opinion on the financial statements taken as a whole. So it's not to review on an overall basis your internal control process. However, during the course of the audit as a byproduct, had we noted control deficiencies or improvement opportunities, we would have brought those forward. In fact, we have in previous years, but there was nothing noted in the current year. On page 6.1-38, we just make reference or highlight some of the uses of technology during the year in terms of our external audit in a couple of particular areas. So we're required to perform tests over your journal entries, both manual and automated entries, and also within the areas of tangible capital assets. So in both of those areas, we're able to employ computer-assisted techniques in order to improve the efficiency of our audit and to actually increase the scope of some of the items that we tested. The journal entry testing is interesting in the sense that we're able to very quickly sort entries to look at in closer detail entries that might be more prone to have errors in them. And again, in performing these procedures, we did not encounter or identify any errors. Page 6.139, we highlight a couple of items in the current year as well, and that's one reference to employee future benefits and also to contingent liabilities. Employee future benefits that are noted within your financial statements include non-pension retirement benefits, accumulated sick leave, etc. within your financial statements. The city employs a third-party actuary to assist in determining what that liability would be at the end of the year. So in terms of getting that report back, we perform procedures as well to ensure that the assumptions that are used are appropriate. We compare those to the assumptions that are used by other municipalities and other organizations to ensure that they're reasonable. We also look at the data, the underlying data that's used, so looking at the head count, the number of employees that are involved. So we audit the data that's provided from the city to the actuary to ensure that those are accurate as well, in order for us to provide or to take reliance on the report that comes back from the actuary. Again, we perform those procedures with no issues noted. Contingent liabilities I always draw out in terms of referring to it within a city setting in the sense that at any point in time the city, just by the nature of operations, is party to claims against it from a litigation standpoint. From an audit standpoint, it's appropriate to record a liability in your financial statements if there is an item for which the city would determine their exposure to be more likely than not that they are exposed, and that you can reasonably estimate what that exposure might be. We then correspond directly with city's solicitors internal in order to determine whether or not there's any items that meet that categorization. I highlight it because often a government organization will refer to reserving for a particular claim. Reserving for a claim doesn't mean recording a liability for a claim, so they're two different things. Reserving is absolutely prudent financial management, and you might reserve for something before it meets the criteria that I mentioned earlier, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you've met the categorization of liabilities. So we corresponded with internal solicitor. We receive back the reports and ensure that those have been accounted for correctly within your financial statements. The next page, 6.140, refers to audit adjustments and differences. And you'll note, as I mentioned earlier, that in fact there were no corrected differences or uncorrected differences, so that's good news. That means the material that was provided to us, other than being arranged or presented in a slightly different fashion than you may have seen previously, is in fact what is included in the financial statements. There were no errors noted in the course of our audit. And the other item I'd point out before concluding is on page 61-41, performance improvement points. Both items that are noted here are actually just updates on items that we'd brought forward a year ago. So in both cases, the items that we had identified and suggested the corrective action a year ago have taken place in the current year. So no issues with the carry forward, and there was no other new items identified in the current period. So that really is the conclusion of the formal part of my presentation. I'm happy to respond to any questions that you may have this morning.
Thank you, Kevin. Council Moore.
On the contingent liabilities, you mentioned that there's a difference between a reserve and
Liability.
the liability. Do we have any reserves for liability?
I believe there are reserves. I don't know if that's a better question for management to respond to.
Because I'm not sure that we've ever asked that question during budget.
Through the chair. Through the chair.
It's coming.
Through the chair, we don't actually have specific reserves budgeted for contingent liabilities at this point in time. So we budget them on an as-we-go basis.
Okay, so how would council know to ask the question? So what are we identifying as potential liability, or what are we reserving funds for?
So through the chair, these would be certain retirement allowances. There'd be sick bank types, payouts for sick banks and so on and so forth like that.
Are there any that would be related to lawsuits and things like that?
So at this time, we do not have provisions for those things.
Okay.
Those would be covered under our insurance policy.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Madam Mayor.
I had a question, and I'm not sure who would answer this, but it was under the highlights of consolidated financial statements. The item that speaks to the City Hall West Tower capital lease obligation. Could you explain this in English to someone who's not financially astute as to how the lease value was recorded in the consolidated? This is on 614. Just so I understand how it's booked and why.
Sure. Through the chair, I can speak to that. The accounting for that is it's considered to be, even though it's a lease, it's considered to be a capital lease, meaning that it's valued as an asset on the city's books, because the substantive transaction is that the city owns it because of the terms of the lease. The way it's recorded is that the fair value, which is an estimate, of course, of the property. You then take the lease payments. You come up with an imputed or implicit interest rate in order to to determine what would be interest and what's principal in terms of accounting for it. It creates an interest rate which isn't, and this is no different than, excuse me, I think as was identified when Jim McCarter's report was presented. There's an implicit interest rate, but it's not a negotiated rate, because also in your payments, you paid for cost certainty. So there's a premium for that risk. So that then creates an interest rate. It's an implicit interest rate. But the accounting for it is that the asset gets set up no higher than the fair value of the asset. And then when you take your actual payments, you use an amortization table, which drives out an implicit interest rate.
And when does this capital lease obligation end? And how does it transition to that new book value?
As you make your lease payments, there is an
Decreases.
there's an implied principal and interest component, and there's an amortization table, and throughout the course of the lease itself, it draws down.
Okay, till it becomes just an asset on the books. Okay. My other question was on 616, which was under the item expenses, and the key items driving the operating expenses. So the one-time costs associated with the city transformation in 2016, I assume this speaks to the restructuring that occurred within the organization and the costs associated with that. Is that what that means? because I didn't know it was called city transformation. I assume it's the HR costs. Is that right?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the only other question I had is, that's in the favorable. In the unfavorable, we speak to the growth in the transit services. Does the revenue not somehow offset some of those costs, or is that calculated somewhere else? For the increasing, I think we had an increase of about 18% in ridership, so I'm assuming there's an offset somehow from a transit perspective.
Through the chair, there would be additional costs associated with the additional revenue, but recorded separately.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, you'll move receipt of the delegation.
Sure.
Councillor Moore, we've brought item 6.1 in front of us. You'll move receipt of that. All in favor of both? That carries. Thank you very much, Kevin. Our next item is item 4.2, Senior Manager, Accounting, Deputy Treasurer, Corporate Services, Audit Findings, Mayor and Councillor's Expense Management Update.
Morning, everyone. I just wanted to provide a quick update to the audit committee in terms of the KPMG specified procedures audit that was conducted last year. My presentation will be fairly brief, but what we wanted to do was just to circle back to the committee in terms of a specified procedures audit that was conducted over mayor and council expenses that were claimed in 2016. This was presented by KPMG in September 2017 to the committee. And there were certain findings in there that management was tasked with following up on and addressing. And what we've done over the last 6 months or so is kind of taken some of those key recommendations from the audit, as well as benchmarking with some of the other municipalities and some of the feedback that we received from council, and gone back and updated our policies and procedures to kind of take those findings into account. And this revised policy was actually approved by council back in February 2018, and it'll be effective effective as of the new term of council of December 1st, 2018. The rest of the presentation is basically just going over some of the key recommendations that KPMG had identified and how we addressed them. So I wasn't planning on going through each of them. Unless committee has specific questions, I'm happy to answer them at this point in time.
They are here in front of us. Anybody have any questions of Z? Madam Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was a willingness of council to be posting our expenses, and I just wondered where, because it's not listed here that we be posting our expenses publicly. So I just wanted to make sure that on an ongoing basis we captured the fact that we were planning to do that, but it wasn't in here that I couldn't find it.
I know it's quarterly.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure somewhere in reports that it gets captured. That's
Correct.
what we're doing, and
It is part of
that
the-
transparency and accountability is important, and we are doing it. It just wasn't captured here, so.
Through the chair, it is in the policy that we are publicly reporting those, but we didn't specifically mention it from a KPMG recommendation perspective.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost, because
No,
it's
absolutely.
hard to find if you go looking for it. So I think the more we talk about it, the more confidence people will
That's
have
right.
that we are doing it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? Madam Mayor, you'll move receipt of the delegation.
Sure.
All in favor? Thank you,
you.
Z. Our next item is item 5.1. It's a report before us, status of management action plans. Are there any questions on this report? Seeing none. Councillor Dillon, you move receipt of this report. All in favor? That carries. Next item is item 5.2, road resurfacing audit report. Are there any questions on this? Moving it? Yep. We'd like a brief presentation.
Through the chair, the 2017 internal audit plan did include an audit of road resurfacing. Overall, we found that enhancement was required with respect to oversight on a number of items around planning, contract administration, payment processing, and customer service. I can go into detail. I'm not really sure how much detail you're looking for. So we didn't look at the bidding process. We looked at With respect to bidding, we looked at the information that was provided to management. There was opportunity for management to holistically look at a complete database. Management has agreed to that, looking at both pricing and quantity. With respect to contract administration, again, formalizing an inspection plan, doing some work around supervision, adding more documentation, updating processes and procedures to ensure that, so with the transfer of road resurfacing from road operations into public works, they were using public works documentation and processes. So it's updating it so that it actually reflects the road resurfacing work itself. And then around customer service, it was an annual review. Oh, sorry, I was looking at the payment processes. A lot of manual processes in place. There is an opportunity for management to look at automating some of those processes. And then finally, with customer service, reviewing on an annual basis the notice of construction that goes to the residents, as well as doing some post-evaluation analytics around customer complaints in order to identify root causes.
Any questions, comments? Mayor Jeffrey.
I don't know that I have questions, but I would say that this was a really interesting report. I'm really glad we did it, and clearly you got into the weeds, which I really appreciated, because I think there is huge exposure for us as a corporation if we don't get it right, considering how many roads and what kind of an ownership we have in so much of our capital within our roads. So I think that it was pretty powerful looking at the planning and the award bidding and the contract administration, as well as the payment processing, and particularly the customer service. I thought that was a real gap. So I guess what I wanted to comment on was I really thought some of this material was very interesting, and we found it in other departments with things being manual and paper-based. The fact that there's no centralized database from previous years, I thought was pretty powerful. So if you don't have data or you're unable to analyze it, you don't know if you've got a good price because you can't do a comparison. So I think that was pretty powerful. I think the fact that fair market pricing for standard work line items wasn't known by management, that there were no industry standards for pricing, which really makes it challenging for our staff in making appropriate assessments on bid pricing provided. There was some interesting information in the database, finding that over 40 line items had an average price increase of 19%, pretty significant process. The analysis was very interesting to show the estimated versus actual quantities, the variances there and the reasons for the variances. So that centralized database is really going to help us do a much better job. So I appreciated that finding and the staff's response to that. The fact that there aren't people bidding was interesting, and you explored that and some of the changes that you're recommending. Is there an expectation that it will make it more competitive and more attractive to people who may want to bid? And you've given some suggestions as to why there was a decline in bid recommendations. Is this the changes that you're making? Do you think that will improve our opportunities?
Through the chair, I believe that management has made changes to the 2018. I actually want to take a step back and say that management has been very supportive as we were working through this audit and has embraced all of our findings. I can have maybe Joe or Jane come and speak to the 2018 bidding process, because I believe they made some changes and that did result in additional bidders coming forward through the process, but I'd rather have them speak to it.
Sure.
I think that there's opportunities for us to work with management as they're implementing their these recommendations for further work moving forward.
Okay. Jean's going to come up.
Through the chair, I just wanted to mention that, as Firouzan had said, we did take a lot of the recommendations very seriously. With our increasing road resurfacing program, it's important that we get a good competitive bid to get the best price we possibly can. So as we were looking through some of our requirements for the bidders to get awarded our projects, what we have to be mindful of is that we only have one season to be able to do all the work. And it's very important to us and our residents that the inconvenience associated with resurfacing is minimized as much as possible. We really want to make sure that the roads that we have planned to get resurfaced actually get done in the construction year. That being said, we did end up looking at some of our asphalt requirements and lowering them a little bit. Again, just making sure that we've got contractors who are able to do the work, have the workforce available. But we did lower them a little bit, and that resulted in us being able to get some different bidders on the projects this year.
So you've already seen the results?
Yes.
Okay. I thought the contract administration component of the review was very interesting. I assume now there is a formal inspection process in place
That's
now
correct.
based on the results afterwards responding to the audit.
That's correct, Madam Mayor. So even though we did have an informal training program, it is now formalized and written down. And it also gives us the opportunity to look at it annually. So what worked for us or didn't work in past years, we have a chance to enhance that every year.
So one of the comments from management was, with regards to addressing that recommendation, was that the current staffing resources were stretched. So, Mr. Chair, I would ask that we bring this back and this specific item be brought up at budget, because at the end of the day, we may need to revise our operating budget to ensure that you have the resources to make sure inspections occur and that work is followed up on. And I think this is certainly an operating budget item that we should bring forward at our next budget. So if I could make that recommendation, because I agree, we're asking you to do more and more with less. So I thought that was very interesting. The other piece was the payment process. I can't recall, I think all the way through management was agreeing, but the fact that there were multiple manual processes and a lot of the discussions between the city's measurements and the contractor's measurements were verbal, and now that has changed so that there is some documentation. Is that right?
That's through you, Mr. Chair. Madam Mayor, when we were doing our payment certificates, a lot of that is sitting down in a meeting and talking about and negotiating what makes sense, what doesn't. Why do you have your number? Why do I have mine? And somehow coming to an agreement. I think what was missing was the documentation of that process and how we got to that number. So I think with a lot of these things, a lot of the work was being done. It wasn't necessarily being documented, and that's what we have to be mindful of as we go forward.
Okay. And the last issue, Mr. Chair, was building a positive customer experience. There were a lot of complaints about road work done this last year. I know that because by the time they get to the mayor's office, they've already been through many of their councillors, and they're extremely frustrated. So I think the fact that we are looking at ways to identify improvements, to get feedback, and certainly based on management's response, I look forward to not hearing about road resurfacing after next season, because clearly it was an area where we just, I think we dropped the ball. I don't think we were good at communicating, and certainly by the time it gets to my office, it's almost unsolvable at that point. People are just angry with the city of Brampton. So I appreciate the work that went into this, and it's clear to me that management put a lot of work into responding, so thank you very much, and I appreciate the audit team and the work that they did. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I know, and just to the mayor, and from what I understand, that there's big changes coming in the way we communicate road resurfacing and the information that we're going to be providing them or have started providing them. Additionally, just with respect to the comment on the inspections, and are we're currently looking at modernizing that a little bit. Is that are we looking at that, doing that for 2019, or is it something that we're currently working on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, those are the kind of things we look at all the time anyway. With our resurfacing program, You'll recall that I had a report that came to committee, was it a year ago? Was it that long? I don't know. But I came to committee with a report showing the projections for road resurfacing as our infrastructure ages. That program is going to get bigger. We have to be able to manage our roads, the roads that we have now, never minding the roads that are coming on board. So as that program increases, we're going to have to be more efficient in how we are managing it, what things we want to look at, what makes sense to look at, where we're going to get our biggest bang for our buck, and making sure that the folks that we have on board are fully trained to be able to look at those things. We have the privilege of hiring like the best students. I have the best students, I have to tell you. They are civil engineering students from all different schools in Ontario. They are very eager to learn the business. They love being out there and having that customer service exposure, but also delivering a product that the city can be proud of. That being said, they come up with a lot of good ideas as well on technology and how we might be doing things a little bit different. And through Mike Donnelly, we've actually changed our student employment program in terms of we want feedback from them. It's not just about giving them a job and experience. Tell us what we can be doing better. So I don't think this is something that we just do once and then that's the way we do it. I think the way things have been done in the past, particularly with the manual processes, that's just a comfort level that we have everything covered. As we go forward, if we can use more technology to be more efficient and be more accurate, that is certainly something we're willing to look at.
Okay, great. So I don't think, Madam Mayor, that you're looking to refer this to budget. Are you just requesting that staff bring forward kind of a highlighted for attention of the Budget Committee?
That specific portion where the staff say that their resources are stretched and that it may have an impact on operating, I take seriously, and I'd like that specific piece to be referred.
So is that okay as staff direction?
That's fine.
No formalized motion needed? Or would you like a formalized motion? I think we
I
have.
think Mr. Fay has something formalized.
Okay.
I think he just got something sent.
So through you, Mr. Chair, a motion could be that the matter of sufficient staffing resources for the purpose of appropriate follow-up for the roads resurfacing program, as highlighted within the April 26, 2018 road resurfacing audit report, be raised during the 2019 budget review process, which is what you said.
I'd be much happier if that happened because my memory will not be working when we get, I will not remember this specific item unless I have some tweaking of my memory. So this will help.
I'll remember.
You'll remember? Okay. Good.
Perfect. Madam Mayor, you'll move that report and
Please.
the
Thank you.
motion?
Yes.
All in favor? That carries.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Not relating to the report. And it could, yeah, you might want, so I don't need an answer to this right now, but I know in the city of Toronto, Mayor Tory has got a program where people take a picture of a pothole and send it. Not that I want my residents to do that yet, but someday would we be able to manage that from, because all I can say is I went to a startup weekend a couple weekends ago, and the students are talking about how to use that GPS positioning. So we had a quick conversation because they didn't understand the difference between provincial and regional and municipal roads and that the challenge we have in coordinating our activities. So I guess I'm asking you to put it in your thinking cap as to how we could potentially offer better customer service to our residents so that they can feel that we're listening and that where it is in our work plan might be something we want to consider in the future. So,
I'm going to go to Joe for that.
okay. Not yet.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's a great program that Toronto has, and other municipalities have also caught on. But it really does take, and Madam Mayor, you already alluded to it, is the staff resources to administer it. So when somebody actually phones in, complain about a pothole, that we actually go and do something about it. I'm not sure Toronto is actually on top of that. They have the program where they accept the calls. I'm not sure they've got the resources to actually go out and actually do something about it. So,
Yeah,
but that's
I'd
something that we can bring forward as a customer service piece.
I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver at this point, so I think it's a budgetary item, and it's a future conversation, but I'm interested to see how it works in other municipalities. I'd rather watch them and and how it works or not works before we attack it. But I just wanted to keep it in our mind of how to engage the public in a more positive way. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There are no other or new business. Councillor question period? Seeing none. Public question period? Seeing none. We have a closed session report. That is item 10.1, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for the purpose of litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. We will reconvene in the little room there. Motion to go in close. Councilor Medeiros, all in favor? Carries.
Okay. I'll stall.
Really warm in here earlier, and now it's cold.
Sorry?
It was really warm in here earlier, and now it's cold.
Yeah, it's cool.
We are back in open, in closed session, on item 10.1, that was advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for the purpose and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before the administrative tribunal affecting the municipality or local board. Direction was given. That concludes. We will entertain a motion for adjournment. Councillor Dillon, all in favor? That carries. Our next regular meeting is Tuesday, June 26th, and it will be at the boardroom in W2 2C/2D West Tower. Thank you very much, everybody.